I'm Erica Zavaleta, and this is Ecosystems of California. The three-dimensional world of kelp forests is one that most people only view from the top, the mirror of terrestrial forests, which most people only view from the bottom. In both cases, there's a tremendous amount of vertical structural diversity present, with canopy, subcanopy, and understory species, epiphytes living at all different levels of that structure, and consumers specializing in the parts that occur at different points along that vertical spectrum. Kelp forests globally are found in areas with relatively cool, nutrient-rich waters at least part of the time, and they're especially prevalent in areas with strong upwelling, like here on the California coast. They require shallow rocky reefs, and they can occur anywhere from very shallow waters all the way down to 40 meters in depth. There are 5 canopy-forming kelp species in kelp forests of North America. 4 of them occur in California. There's the giant kelp, bull kelp, and its southern species, and the feather boa kelp. And of those 4, 2 are the main canopy-producing species in most of California's kelp forests, the bull kelp and the giant kelp. Kelp forests are incredibly productive ecosystems, and that productivity is fueled by the kelp itself. So anchored to the bottom or the benthos by a holdfast, kelp are spared from having to invest a lot into structural tissue to support their height because of the water holding them up. So they can instead invest a lot into the growth of their blades. These large surface area, thin photosynthesizing surfaces that are up near the sunlight and produce lots and lots of energy that they can then translocate to depths where the sunlight may barely reach. Because they don't have to invest a lot in structural tissues, kelp can grow on the order of 1 meter a day during the most productive times of year. So in that way, kelp forests subsidize not only a lot of consumers and productivity within kelp forests themselves, but they also subsidize other more heterotrophic ecosystems, including beaches, like the one that I'm sitting on, where kelp that washes up on the beach undergirds a community of consumers, and the subsidization of fishery species that are favored offshore and that are produced in the kelp forests. Below the canopy, other species of kelp, like sea palms and laminaria, form a subcanopy anywhere from about 1 to 3 meters above the bottom. And then finally, there are species of prostrate kelp that inhabit the benthos, the very bottom, and provide habitat for fish and invertebrates. Now, the phenology of kelp, the timing of its biomass and events over the course of the year, is shaped by upwelling, nutrient availability, wave action, temperature, and day length, among other things. In California, a typical life cycle for the kelp forest is one where adult kelp individuals are ripped out by winter storms, and so its biomass declines. And then in the summer, as those storms subside, day length is long, temperatures are warm, a lot of production can occur, with the maximum biomass and productivity happening in late summer and early fall. Kelp forest ecosystems have a pretty interesting food web structure because they have 2 bases. On the one hand, the upwelling of nutrients and so on supports a lot of production by the kelp itself. And so one base of primary production are the kelps, and they support a variety of consumers, including grazers on the kelp, detritivores like abalones and certain kinds of sea stars, and then fishes that are eating those animals. But there's another entry point for primary production to the system because the other really important space-inhabiting organisms in kelp forests aren't plants at all. They're filter-feeding invertebrates, things like urchins that actually use the phytoplankton out of the water column for their base of primary production. So phytoplankton support a different pathway of production in the kelp forest, whereby phytoplankton are consumed both by planktivorous fishes like rockfishes and by all of those bottom-dwelling filter-feeding invertebrates. And then those in turn move up the food web into carnivorous fishes and sea stars, and finally apex predators, which include things like the sunflower star, sea otters, and the moray eel, as well as lots of non-resident predators that play a role, such as sharks and harbor seals. Sea otters were hunted nearly to extinction earlier in California's history, and their decline heavily affected kelp forest ecosystems. Sea otters feed heavily on invertebrates like sea urchins that are grazers on the kelp. So without the sea otters, those populations of sea urchins and other invertebrates really exploded. With so many grazers, the kelp individuals got eaten down or overgrazed, and what was left in the place of the kelp forests were low productivity, relatively low diversity, and structurally simple urchin barrens and other benthic ecosystems. So with the recovery of otters in recent decades, kelp forests have come back and are much more widespread in California than they were in that period of otter decline. And all of that demonstrates what an important role the otters play as a keystone species, a species that impacts its ecosystem dynamics really out of proportion to its numbers and biomass.